Good morning. Happy New Year. It is January 6th, 2021, and we are back in action as the African American lawyer section of the State Bar of Texas, gathering with law enforcement entities across the state of Texas, spearheaded by Kevin Lawrence, Doug Griffith, Travis Hammond, Clay Taylor. Gig 'em. I'm going to give him a little bit of that since we have no Longhorns that may step up at this moment. They did extremely well in the Orange Bowl. I have to be very proud of our home state as well as UT in the Alamo Bowl. With that said, our communities and our societies have been struggling with looking to connect and find solutions, as we noted in 2020, for law enforcement and citizens to be able to collaborate a lot better in one, information, not just gathering, but sharing, and also finding solutions to have a safer community, a safer state of Texas. So with that, I certainly want to say welcome back. We're continuing as we're about to start the Texas legislative session here in a week. And Kevin Lawrence, thank you so much for agreeing last year to gather both resources from law enforcement and the legal community to address, tackle, and look for solutions. And for people that may not know, just to reiterate, I was a staffer in the Texas legislature in the
many moons ago.
Yes, in the Criminal Justice Committee, and working as committee director and general counsel. We collaborated there. I had the fortunate opportunity to also work with and for TMPA. So we thought the best business call was a personal call. And as we looked at it, this would be an opportunity for us to add to not only the awareness and some of the marching and protesting, but this would be a tangible way to go about finding not only awareness and recognition, but solutions that will help both citizens and law enforcement.
Very kind words, Steve. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. This is something that, as we put together a legislative agenda, we needed to be more than just a segment of the state bar. We needed to collaborate. And I think so many times people don't collaborate with the other side. We just want to then take a stance, and now it's more of an assertive or an aggressive standoff competition. Humans don't need competition. They need collaboration. And that's what we've been doing. We're not saying we all agree and we sing, kumbaya at the end of everything, but we make issues and facts aware, not to just each other as subject matter experts, but also to the citizens that we look to serve.
I think it's very poignant that you made the comment, the other side. And I think that's actually kind of at the heart of the issue, is that we tend to take sides. And what we should all be working toward the same exact objective. And I think that's one of the things we've been able to accomplish with these conversations is we've been able to identify common ground. We've been able to identify the fact that we do, in fact, all want the same thing. We want to provide professional, quality public safety services to the citizens of Texas. We want a criminal justice system, a system of jurisprudence that functions and it treats all people fairly and equitably. And if we can agree on what the objectives are, it makes the conversations a lot easier to have.
Well, as professionals, we need to look how we can fit better together for the community, not as adversaries. And I think, most would say, well, but the criminal defense bar, they're the only ones that would not necessarily agree to be in lockstep with law enforcement, but the prosecutorial side of the bar, they're always in agreement. That's not necessarily true. And again, if we are going to have these professional degrees that represent the citizens, we need to have a better understanding about how that law enforcement side works. Because I think all too often, just like colors of skin and ethnicity, we have our prejudices and we have our discriminatory beliefs prior to even collaborating with the other entities that are a part of the system in our society. And I think that's where we failed miserably.
Well, I think part of it too is having a working knowledge and actually understanding what the other person's saying. Because a lot of times we get out there and beat our chest and yell and scream and talk, but until you slow down and listen to what the other side has to say and actually comprehend and understand, you're not going to get anywhere. Because in reality, there's things that I don't know about what you guys do. Then there's things y'all don't know about what we do. And so if we work together to, like you said, we won't agree, but we can understand. And that's where it starts.
Exactly. And it gives us a framework to find some common ground or a way that we're going to move forward in a way that's beneficial to the citizens in our community. We don't need people dying, unnecessarily. We don't need communities having animosity to the group that we're looking towards as professionals to truly protect and serve them. And so we had to, one, agree to come together like we have, and two, as you said, Doug, listen, attempt to understand, ask the questions, understand after those things have been addressed, and then look for the solutions. And at least with that type of game plan, we've, I think, provided a way. Nikki and I had offline discussion on how we're looking to revise what we're looking to do at this time, just because of the opportunities we've had with y'all throughout all of last year, starting probably around June.
No, I would completely agree. I think that a couple of the items, especially our initial conversations, Doug and Kevin, were very helpful in just understanding the background of where we got to where we're at and some of the objectives. Like you said, we have a way of kind of looking at the loudness, but when you stop and you say, what is the underlying objective or what are we trying to solve? It allows you to be able to kind of regroup. And me and Stephen, like we said, just based on these conversations we've been having, have looked at a couple of the items on our legislative agenda and noted that there are a couple of things that we need to revise so that it's more effective and it actually aligns with what we've been discussing.
And hopefully,
I think Steve will agree with me on this. Very often the legislative process starts out looking at issues from the wrong direction. Very right. Often people walk in there with a solution looking for a problem rather than identifying what the problem is and then talking about true solutions to that problem.
And I think what could be very assisting in the time that we've taken last year and continuing forward is the fact that Rudy is positioned in a way that he can talk to those Black chiefs of staff in the legislature. Mm-hmm. He can talk to the Black elected officials. And here he is now. Right on cue.
Waiting for that introduction.
he's just been waiting for the introduction. He's been in the wings.
You're better than James T. Kirk, man. You beamed in right at the appropriate moment. But again, to have a connector like Council Member Rudy Mateer and also our chair, he gets to take the resources and the time that we've put in as coming together. And I know, Kevin, you've already made yourself available for Rudy when in his new position as the legislative session starts. He has resources that probably weren't even considered or imagined prior to us gathering and him being selected for the position that he will embark upon.
Morning, Rudy.
Good morning, Rudy.
I was like, wait a minute. You guys weren't joking. I just jumped at the right time. I was like,
it was perfect.
It's perfect, man.
But yes, and Kevin, we've already had a great meeting already. Thank you for doing that over the holidays too, Kevin. I really do appreciate that. And it was just the kind of meeting that we were talking about, where you get to talk about real issues, concerns, get viewpoints and ideas, and figure out what we can work on and what we can get united on. Because I mean, that's what we're all trying to do: get better communities. So that the only way that's going to happen, crazy concept, is to talk and work with one another.
Right. Well, I think it takes away the frustration. I think what I've seen, whether we like the media or not, is you see a frustration between groups. I believe we've circumvented a lot of that by bringing together the right decision makers to the table. So when Rudy, Senator so-and-so, if it's Miles or West, or if we go to the House and we're talking to Dutton or Coleman or anyone like that, you now have the resource to say, good people who have been elected, I'll bring Kevin, I'll bring Doug, I'll bring Travis. I'll sit them down with us. And now we can't say we hid behind this, that, and the other. You have the decision makers right here that I've established a relationship with and have met with, because if they don't believe you, all these are recorded. And we've gone through a lot of issues that affect our state and your districts. And we can sit down now, and we don't have to do it in a situation that's necessarily public, but we can come together publicly after we've had those hard decisions. And even if it's by Zoom calls, they're still highly effective.
Absolutely. And you know, and this is where you got to give a lot of credit, not only to Stephen, but to Nikki and the African American Lawyer Section for the State Bar and our board, you know, saying, hey, listen, we want to be part of the solution. We see these problems. It's not just enough for us to complain. We have to be part of the solution. You know, there's a saying that one of my good friends said to me years ago, which is true: don't make decisions about us without us. And if we want to be involved and in the room and having these conversations with that, we as the leaders, you know, not only African American community, but as bar leaders and then, you know, the leaders of Texas, we've got to come together and we've got to talk to the leaders, crazy concept of law enforcement, and say, hey, listen, this is what we're seeing. Let's see what we can do here. So thank you guys for everything you do. It really does make a difference.
Well, again, we have too much education, experience, and the relationships to let all of that sit dormant while people are running around trying to figure things out. And to me, you have to use the talents that you were given to make some type of advancement. And it may be slower at the beginning. Who knows? We may make a whole bunch more advancement than we ever thought. But to not use those experiences, talents, educations, and relationships would be completely throwing things in the face of our great state and just basically casting aside all the opportunity that we would have to make progress. Kevin.
Sorry, what, sir?
Can we start then on some of those recommendations, kind of set the stage for that? I think it probably makes sense to take today and next Wednesday to kind of go through those, because I don't think you want to speed through recommendations that have been put together as these. And probably we have some pretty poignant comments about these recommendations, given our experience in education and backgrounds regarding what we're going to be talking about next.
Sure. Where would you like to start? Which recommendation?
Let's start with recommendation issue number 1.
Well, let's preface what we have, Nikki, yes, and what we're looking at, so that there'll be a marker for all who are listening. Please.
Okay. You want me to do that?
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
So what we're reviewing, or what we have taken a look at, is the Sunset Advisory Commission report that was issued. It's the 2020 to 2021 for the 87th legislature. And this was issued in November. And basically what it is it's a review. And Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like they took a review on the law enforcement and the way that it's regulated here in Texas. And they issued some recommendations. If you want to give more of a background about how this report comes about and how often it's done, that would be great.
Okay. Every law and every agency in Texas is automatically sunsetted. There's no such thing as a perpetual law or a perpetual entity under state law. So the Sunset Commission's job is whenever an agency or a statute is up, whenever they're about to expire, Sunset Commission does a complete and thorough review and then makes recommendations to the legislature about whether or not to extend that statute, to extend that agency, and if so, what changes might be necessary. The Commission on Law Enforcement, I think their most recent review was 10 years ago. So they were under a 10-year sunset this particular session. And since it's due to expire in 21, the commission was looking at what to do with TCOLE. And I was actually interviewed as part of their background, their work on this. And not to try and steal your thunder, basically the commission came back and said, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement has never been given the resources or the authority to be a true regulatory agency, like we have for attorneys, like we have for doctors, like we have for other professions in this state. And even though we might be ahead of some other states in where we sit with regard to regulating our law enforcement, we still have room for improvement. So what the commission has basically come up with is they're recommending that TCOLE be extended for another biennial for 2 more years, and that during that time that the state create a blue ribbon panel with 15 members to do a much more in-depth review of law enforcement in Texas and come back with recommendations for the 2023 session about what might be done to address training, regulation of law enforcement officers, licensing of law enforcement officers, and so on and so forth. So that's in a nutshell what they're proposing.
And again, all agencies go through this. It's not necessarily because you have bad or poor performance. It's a way to improve. It's a way to look at what has happened in our state and hopefully make the adjustments accordingly. I find it very fascinating, Kevin, that Sunset said that TCOLE is not a true regulatory agency. That's because I worked for the Board of Private Investigators before it became the Commission on Private Security. We had 200,000+, commissioned, non-commissioned, alarm installers, all these folks across Texas. And I think what you're saying to me is that we had a better setup there. It was more of a mismanagement and then a budgetary scenario more than when we're talking about peace officers that, again, are looked at definitely a bit different than security guards.
Yeah, and to go back even a little further, we may have actually talked about this, but it was all the way back in 1960 that TMPA first started recommending that the state of Texas, create a statewide commission to regulate law enforcement. Because up until 1970, law enforcement, other than state officers, the state didn't regulate law enforcement. The state handled the Department of Public Safety and Alcoholic Beverage Commission, whatever else, the ones that actually worked for the state. But they didn't regulate local, city, county law enforcement. And so it took 10 years from 1960 to 1970 for the legislature to finally create TCOLE. But TCOLE was more of a repository than anything else, creating, training curricula and so on and so forth. They've never really been given the authority to, for example, to decommission a law enforcement agency, except in very narrowly defined terms. And that's been changed a little bit over the last few sessions. But up until very recently, they couldn't come in and just shut down a law enforcement agency for incompetence, for example. And while they do have the authority to revoke licenses of peace officers, it's also a very narrowly defined set of criteria. And while we are concerned about expanding that authority. We're not opposed to it. We just simply want to, we think that there has to be some sort of a due process component included in there. Like I'm sure you have a due process component for the state bar. You don't revoke a lawyer's license to practice law without giving them a fair hearing of some kind, right?
And Kevin, and I want to extrapolate further on that. Full disclosure, I serve on the Board of Disciplinary Appeals, which is essentially the Supreme Court, the final court, where we're underneath the Supreme Court regarding lawyer accountability in the state of Texas. Because, you know, one of the important things about our profession is that we self-regulate and we hold our attorneys accountable for their actions with that. And what Kevin said is extremely important to articulate right there, is that it is a meticulous process, an elongated process that is drive to not just kick out bad attorneys, but to help address issues and issues that attorneys have. So if there's substance abuse issues or something else going on from there, they work with them. If they don't know how to manage clients, they work with them. If they don't know how to manage funds and work from this, they work with them on there as well. But it's a due process that's put in place right there to go ahead and hold attorneys accountable and support attorneys, and more importantly, make sure that the public is protected from actions done purposely or inadvertently. Let's be honest, either way, by attorneys on that as level. And what you're saying is the same expectation that people have regarding law enforcement. And everything I've heard over and over again, like I told you, even when we had that conversation with Doug, I think it was Abby, Doug, Steven, myself, and you, Kevin, back in June or something like that, or really, early June, that conference call, when it was like, hey, listen, if you have something with due process, we're actually showing and allowing for the officers to be able to advocate for themselves and talk to these issues. We're all for that. And I know it seems crazy to us, kind of thinking, okay, so why isn't that the case? And why are we wanting that to happen right there as well? But that's all we're asking for.
I did an interview yesterday with a reporter, and I won't say which outlet it was. I don't want to, steal his thunder at all, but we were talking about this very issue, right? He was asking the age-old question about why are the police associations like TMPA, like HPOU, why are you protecting bad cops? And I said, you have no idea how much we don't try to protect bad cops. We have worked for 70 years to professionalize law enforcement in Texas. And we do everything we can to not only weed out bad cops, but to not hire bad cops. People are going to be bad cops to start with. But what we do need, more important than anything else, is to make sure there is some kind of due process, because it's not enough to get rid of the bad cops. You have to make and keep good cops in the process. And if you don't have some sort of due process, you're just going to wind up with a constant transient population in these uniforms out here. I read an article yesterday by a former officer from Seattle who's now in law school at Georgetown University, and he talked about exactly that's the crisis we're having right now in law enforcement across this country, is that too many of our cities and our counties, and in some case states, think it's okay that as long as somebody's got a pulse, you could put a police uniform on them and expect them to go out there and do this job. And it's just not true.
And if I might just add to while you're talking about the due process, Kevin, I know that before, when we first approached this subject, me and Doug had a good conversation on what exactly was meant by due process. Because you're saying due process, and then you have those people that are in the background saying, well, officers are allowed to do this and to do that. And so they feel as if they are getting due process. And that's why, like Rudy said, that they're protecting, feel like they're protecting. So we have to make sure that we're clear on what is meant by the due process, right? And so that way people can understand, because people don't understand the process that goes on beyond the scenes, just like with the lawyer process. When we get the complaint and we get the opportunity to respond and we get the opportunity to defend, when you at first glance hear these stories, right, through the media, or you see the different situations that happen with police and citizens, you don't necessarily understand what's going on beyond the scenes, because that's not truly explained. And so I don't know if it's worth, when we are having these conversations, doing some kind of seminar or something to explain what is meant by due process, so that they understand it's not we're not trying to say to give them more time or to protect them. We're just saying allow the process to take place without all of the outside noise that then doesn't give an opportunity for both sides to be heard. Because at the end of the day, it's a bureaucracy. It's not just the officer, it's that agency. It's a lot more that goes into that as well.
And maybe I can give just a quick thumbnail of what we mean by due process.
That would be great.
And this was obviously this. You're right. We could spend hours and hours and hours talking about the fine print and the details and everything, but when it comes right down to it, it's this. And where this may differ from regulation of lawyers and doctors is that there has to be a transparency component when it comes to law enforcement. So if at a 30,000 foot level, we could adopt a statute that says police officers cannot be disciplined without cause, and cause will be determined in an open public hearing where all the facts are vetted in front of X, in front of the city council, in front of the commissioner's court, in front of the school board, in front of the Texas legislature, whoever that, that decision maker, whatever that decision making authority is, a full open vetting in public. Okay. Could we all agree to that? And the answer is no. For 70 years in the state of Texas, we have not been able to agree that that is a good process.
Why do you think that is?
Doug, would you like to take a shot at why that is?
I think you put Doug in the spot. Hey, Doug, answer.
No, I'll tell you straight out. It's because it's all about power. A chief's going to come in and tell you, I need the ability to hire and fire at will. I need to be able to fire people at will. Well, that leads to corruption. Over and over and over again, we've seen that especially in these small towns or people that don't have the 143 protections. They can hire and fire at will. Trust me, my chief would love to have that right now. He would love to be walking up, you know what, you're fired. Because he does fire a lot of people. Give them the opportunity to leave on their own, whichever. But you got to have a process in place in there that protects the rights of people who are being unjustly either targeted or, I don't want to say picked on, but that's kind of the issue. If you have a supervisor that doesn't like you in a small agency with no 143 protections, guess what? You're going to get fired for no reason other than the guy doesn't like you.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, Doug, but this is also something I mentioned to that reporter yesterday. Folks also have to understand, I don't know how many of your clients complain about you as an attorney, but I'm guessing anytime the result isn't what they wanted, they blame it on you. If they didn't get what they thought they should have gotten, somehow it's the lawyer's fault. Well, that's pretty common for law enforcement. You have to remember, law enforcement's primary job is to go out and tell our bosses when they've done something wrong. We're out there writing them tickets, arresting them, and those are the voters. Those are the people we work for. Okay, we generate complaints. So, Rudy, I'm going to ask you, when's the last time you got a ticket?
Man,
Nikki, when's the last time you got a ticket?
I don't know. That's a good question.
It's been a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you come away from that feeling really good about that officer?
The last time
Man, what a great cop. I really appreciate that person.
No, I did not, because I should have never received a ticket in the first place.
Okay.
That's why it was properly dismissed very quickly.
I was going to say, Kevin, you asked me the wrong question. You should have asked me when's the last time my daughter got a ticket, because then I was going to tell you about that.
Okay. When's the last time the cops had to call you and say, Mr. Mattia, your child has done X, or, this has happened or that's happened? The fact is, we're put into situations where we get complained on. And the vast majority of the complaints are frivolous, bogus, whatever you want to call it. That doesn't exempt us. It doesn't mean we're absolved of our duties of investigating the complaints and making sure that we don't have systemic problems going on. It just means there's a whole lot of other stuff we have to weed through and wade through to get to that point. So there has to be some sort of process in place that deals with that. And simply giving any chief or sheriff or constable unfettered authority to hire and fire at will, like Doug says, even if it doesn't lead to corruption, it leads to cronyism and it leads to bad law enforcement, bad policing. And that's why the citizens, it's not the cops that need it so much, it's the citizens need to know that there is some process in place to keep good cops on the streets. So did we get kind of off the topic of what the commission actually recommends?
We did, but it's okay. It all gives us a good background as to where to start. I think the first thing we were going to look through some of the recommendations and some of the issues that were identified. And the first issue that was identified is actually something that we talked about. I mean, we didn't use this exact language, but we did talk about some of the components that they raised in issue 1 on the where they talked about Texas' approach to regulating law enforcement is effective, and they brought up the training. That there was inadequate training, lack of statewide standards, that the TCOLE found Texas' approach has resulted in a fragmented, outdated system with poor accountability, lack of statewide standards, and inadequate training. We've talked about the training issue. I think that was our first 3 conversations when we first started these weekly sessions. And so we've talked about that. I would like to hear your take, and then we'll add our take on that basically that issue that they identified in some of the recommendations, if you guys want to start first. Do you agree with that?
I noticed Doug leaning in apprehensively like he's ready to go. So
the issue is you can't train every department the same. Okay. Smaller towns don't have the budget to train to the level that they should, which I'm all about training. I think the more training, the better. The more training you have, the better the officer you have. It becomes second nature to them. Prime example, body cameras. I taught the body camera class here in Houston, all our officers, because I believe in them. I think they're a great tool. But not every town has the ability to say, hey, we're going to dedicate this guy to train body cameras and learn all about them. They don't have that ability. They may have 10 or 12 officers, or even if they only have 50 officers, then you're looking at, they got to take time out of their day. They've got to have one dedicated person to learn about the system, train everybody up on that system. And the training is just going to be different from a major city. Now, that being said, there are certain things that the TCOLE Commission does mandate for training every 2 years. The problem is most of it is not something that's really effective for every agency. So again, you've got to have a balance in there of what should be mandated for every agency across the state. A de-escalation should be mandated across the state. There should be a standardized firearms training across the state. There's several different things that I believe, and of course, this is just me. I don't want to speak for Kevin because he may have a different opinion, but there are certain issues that mental illness, now that we are taking on a bigger role in that aspect of society, we have to train our people that way. And as much as I don't believe that's a real police function, we have to look in reality and say it is, because that's what we deal with. Homeless issues all over the state, we're seeing it. Austin's really having an issue right now with that, and nobody knows what to do with it. So therein lies part of the problem is each city has different regulations. Each city has different policies. Each city has a different need for their training. So you have to be careful how you do that.
But also, Doug, and when we've been talking with some of our legislatures about, they've been talking about mandating certain trainings or putting that in there in reference to the sunset here. But, you briefly touched on it. If they start adding in a bunch of trainings, there has got to be there's got to be a financial component to that.
Correct.
Even if you're a bigger city or smaller city, the pandemic has seriously affected everyone. And as we've talked about in the past, the first thing that's always cut is the training. So if there isn't a financial component to go with that, that will sink a lot of places.
And Travis,
we can't even train.
I was about to say, there's something that along exactly what Doug just said and what you just said, Travis, is that we all understand there's a lot of times we get unfunded mandates. And it's like, hey, listen, do good. But you're like, wait a minute. Okay, I don't have the FTEs and I don't have the money, yet you're telling me to do this. How am I supposed to do that? If we're truly talking about making transformative systemic changes here around law enforcement to get the training, get the accountability, everything else that we want with that, there has to be a funding piece to it. So Travis, when you're having these discussions, are they telling you they're willing to go ahead, they meaning the legislatures, to add a funding mechanism to that? Or are they saying, well, guess what? This is a local issue. And since it's a local issue, shouldn't you be talking to your council members or your county officials about how they're going to fund that instead?
Well, our discussions have everyone that we've talked with has said we understand that. We understand that there should be a funding that comes with that. But now whether something will actually get done or happen, because even they've acknowledged the budget this year is going to be extremely tight for the entire state because of the pandemic and things of that nature. So so the answer to your question is they understand that, but whether something will actually happen or not, and granted the session is just starting, beginning to start now. So
and some of this,
I want to add something here, because Doug talks about what TCOLE mandates it or mandates that. In my experience, TCOLE has never mandated any training at all. It always comes from the legislature. It is always, and it's more often than not, it's a knee-jerk reaction to something that needs to be handled in a much more defined manner. So perhaps we should encourage the legislatures to stop trying to dictate the specific training and making it a statewide thing, and giving TCOLE the authority to set those standards and have them, maybe different standards for different agencies, different standards, because Houston has one set of needs and Muleshoe has a different set of needs. And, there has to be some accommodation for that kind of stuff. And not saying that we don't need more and better training, but I think we need to rethink our approach to it altogether.
Yep, agree. And again, right now we can't even do training in Houston. We had a training class a couple of weeks ago. 30 of the 60 in the class come down with COVID.
Oh, wow.
So we have canceled all training right now at our academy.
Yeah, Travis.
We haven't canceled ours, but I was absolutely involved in that just before Christmas. We had 12 of us in a training class to do our regular yearly training to cover our hours, and 10 of us ended up testing positive for COVID through Christmas, and 2 of our instructors, and so everyone was out during that time for over Christmas and New Year's, and so same deal.
So having said that, Rudy, I think we can all agree that whatever the state comes up with as far as setting a specific number of hours or requiring specific training, and I agree with Doug, there's things that we should be requiring every officer to go through. I think arrest, search, and seizure updates, making sure officers are current on what the most recent case law says about the jobs we're supposed to be doing out there on the street. I think that's the kind of stuff that has to be done more often and done better. But if we're going to do stuff like that, the state also has to come up with some sort of a funding mechanism, because most of these local agencies don't have the resources to make it happen.
Or there could be there's another issue there. You can always have TCOLE put together online classes that officers have the ability to go on and watch. And now I wouldn't put any kind of hands-on training through that, but these legislative updates and stuff like that, there's no reason the TCOLE couldn't put that out. We go to their website, you automatically get credit for it, and then you've got officers that are updated on all that, versus the departments having to spend money to have somebody train, house them, and everything else for a class.
So Doug, I think I'm going to be afraid to ask this question. Nikki knows where I'm going with this as well. Are you telling me that's not happening right now through TCOLE?
Not to my knowledge.
Very, very little of what TCOLE offers can be accomplished online. Very little.
Correct.
Wow.
What? Okay. We're lawyers, right? Okay, so I'm just going to say that. Okay, so it's a different field, but why is that the case? Just like you said, the latest regarding search and seizure, some of these other things with that. Why is that the case?
Look at another part of that report where they talk about the technology that TCOLE has.
That's issue number 2.
Database.
Yeah.
Because in order to provide online training, you have to have some sort of mechanism to make sure you've got the right person taking and getting credit for that class. And I don't think TCOLE has the technology in place currently, or the funding to get the technology to ensure that. Plus, as Doug also pointed out, there's a lot of police training that just doesn't lend itself to being done online. We had I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Well, they're already in trouble, but you can't do tactical police driving online. Sorry.
Right.
You can't play a video game and learn how to do a pursuit driving. It's just not going to happen.
Are you sure?
So then the answer is right there, right? It's not mutually exclusive. Which you can lend to online training, do online training. What you can't. And go from there.
I think Kim Vickers or TCOLE will agree with you, but he needs the resources to make that happen.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem that we've identified. I understand that not everything can be done online. We also understand that different localities, different municipalities, based on size, I think we talked about that, locations are going to have different needs. But I do believe that there is value in having at least some kind of baseline. Some kind of thing that we can identify that everyone should have this kind of training. And then depending on the locality, the size, you may vary a little bit. It's kind of like with our rules of procedure. Like we have our standard civil rules of procedure, and then each court you operate in may have their own local rules, right? That you have to kind of adapt to based on where you're practicing in and based on where you're going to be appearing. And so I think it's beneficial because without that, you do have these little, and I'm not going to say little because some of them are not little, but you have some jurisdictions that are having more trouble when it comes to regulating their law officers or even having effective officers and effective community relationships that kind of leads to the training issue, right? Some people they take their training, Doug and Travis, and based on our conversations, I know that that's something that you take very seriously, and some of the other officers that have been on the call, but we've also know that there are some that don't, and that is a problem. And so without having some kind of mandate or some kind of baseline, you're not going to have some consistency. So that does create, to me, an issue.
I want to throw another fly in the ointment here, by the way. When it comes to the state of Texas trying to implement whatever policies or regulations, also consider this. Our political structure is such that in some of these cases, whether or not the state has the authority to dictate things depends on who runs that department. If you're talking about a constitutionally elected sheriff, a constitutionally elected constable, who don't actually answer to the commissioner's court when it comes to the running of their departments, who do they answer to? Well, they answer to the voters, and that's pretty much the end of it. Whereas the chief of police in Pflugerville answers to a city manager who answers to a city council who answers to the voters. So there's a different level of participation there, a different level of accountability that goes on there. In some of our cities, and I think there's only 3 cities in the state that are left, they elect their chief of police. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying it's a different dynamic, and whether or not the state has the authority to dictate to a constitutionally elected official exactly what they have to do with their department becomes another political football.
But it goes to, so along those lines, just like Kevin, I like how you said, the differences and the accountability structures for these things. But in the end, there is accountability, right? And we're not be all end alls. Like in the end, if I screw up regarding what I'm doing as a council member, I have my constituents to go ahead and deal with that. If I'm allowing something to happen, or something occurred in our police department that we didn't hold someone accountable, our constituents will let us be held accountable for these things with that. And
but in addition to having to answer to the voters, there's also a recall provision in the Pflugerville City Charter that gives the voters a way of getting you out of office right now. Yeah. That doesn't exist for a county official. It does not exist for a sheriff or a constable.
See that's interesting, right? Because you would just think to yourself, you're like, well, no, that should be for any elected official. Saying, hey, listen, you screw. I mean, sorry to throw us under the bus over here, people, but I mean, that should be that way for any elected official.
Don't you think? And again, I don't want to mention anybody by name, but there's a county very close to Pflugerville that's had an issue with their sheriff over the last couple of years. Don't you think if there were a process, they wouldn't have waited until this last election? Somebody would have started that process a little bit sooner.
You know what? And maybe, and let's be frank. That may be the illustration that's used necessary to be able to actually implement that. And
don't worry, we're wearing out ponies using that example.
I was about to say, Nikki, this may be something that we need to talk to TMPA offline about to see what we can do and put in our legislative proposal. Because I mean,
great.
Yeah, that does. I mean, that that doesn't make sense, because in the end, we're all in service to the public. That's our job. We work for the public. We work for you. Everyone who's watching here, this is something I reiterate to students all the time, from first grade into their college. We work for you. It's not the other way around. So you make sure you hold us accountable for our actions and what we do, because that's what we do. We work for you, period.
So when it comes to talking about having some sort of system, allowing TCOLE to have the authority to regulate agencies and to regulate law enforcement officers individually, we talked about there has to be some kind of due process, but there also has to be a fundamental structural change to give TCOLE or the state of Texas the ability to overrule a constitutional official. Otherwise, we've got a legal battle that'll keep the lawyers employed, but it won't solve the problem.
No, that's a very good point. It's a very good point. So, one of the other recommendations was, of course, to continue the Texas Commission. And I think we talked about that at the beginning. It said for 2 years until 2023. And then it says establish a blue ribbon panel to comprehensively evaluate the regulation of law enforcement in Texas and make recommendations for needed changes. Can you explain what a blue ribbon panel is for those of us that maybe,
all of us that are
how
on
that
here.
would work? Okay. That works.
Hey, put us on that commission. We'll get it worked out.
It is not uncommon for this process to be used not only in Texas but across the country. The particular recommendation here is that the governor appoint 5 people, the lieutenant governor appoints 5 people, and the Speaker of the House appoints 5 people, and it be 15 citizens. And I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, guys, but I'm lobbying very hard. I want to be one of these 15 people. But I think we have to have a lot of law enforcement experience on this committee. You've got to have people who understand law enforcement inside and out. But we also have to have people who understand the governmental process. They have to understand the legislative process. So it's going to require a mixture. And we have to have folks that simply represent the communities at large, that can help see the world from a different perspective than what we see it either as elected officials or as law enforcement officers. So there has to be a mix. But anyway, that's how the construct would be as it currently sits. Now, of course, the legislature could change this up any way they please. But it's not uncommon, and we think it's a really good step in the right direction if the legislature decides to go that way.
I agree.
So then this is something that we'll definitely want to be looking out for. And I agree with Rudy. It's something, the training and some of the IT stuff and some of the other stuff, like I said, the African-American lawyer section led by Stephen and myself have put together a very robust agenda that we intend to act on. And this is definitely something that we need to consider. I think we had something in there about the training and stuff, but we were not aware of with the IT infrastructure. And I think with the time being the way that it is, I've kind of taken over for Stephen. It's about 10:56, so we only have about 4 minutes. And so I don't know that we have enough time to get into the next issue, but I do think that one that we could definitely focus on is going to be issue number 3. I would like to skip to that one. I think we talked about the contracting, like the IT stuff, but number 3 is very interesting. It's key elements of TCOLE statute and procedures do not conform to common licensing and regulatory standards. We have talked about this. The ability for criminal background checks of applicants. It talks about being able to really move the needle with respect to, it looks like, when they're licensed, or the ability for them to even be able to become an officer. And I think that some of the points that are raised here are really important, and definitely a discussion that we need to kind of have next week when we talk. So we'll be prepared for that and with some examples, if that's okay.
Okay.
All righty. Well, it's been great talking to everybody again. I said Happy New Year. Stephen's not on the phone to be negative again. So we'll end.
I just want to ask him what happened to his coach.
Yeah, he hung up quickly. He didn't want to get into that.
Oh, yeah. He started off all about UT, and then all of a sudden, where'd your coach go? Just wondering.
Yeah. And then we got the new one coming in, Sarkeesian. I think we could have an entire week just to talk about anyway.
Hey.
I got 2 words for all of y'all. Go Irish.
Oh Lord. Jeez.
Awesome.
And my brother's a domer, and I'll tell you, it's always funny because it's like Charlie Brown, right? You gear up. Oh yes, this is what's gonna happen. And Lucy's got the football, and as soon as they're gearing up right there,
it's right away.
Yeah, no time with them. So yeah, don't get me started on that as well. Let's just say it's a new age, Doug, for the Longhorns. Let's see what happens with it.
Hey, I want them to do well. I want them. I want A&M. Any Texas team, I want them to do well. The Cowboys. I don't like the Cowboys.
Hey, let's not get crazy here, all right? Some of us don't blow leads in the last couple of seconds over here and allow for the Titans to pull out wins that they shouldn't have, okay?
Don't get me started on Texas, man. I'm so disappointed in that group.
Oh, man.
I'm at the point now, trade JJ. Let him go to a winning team, please.
I don't know. The Houston Texans are too busy partying with their quarterback to be able to pay attention to stuff. Deshaun Watson is really pulling on all the stops to defy COVID.
Wait. But can we bring up that the Longhorns, for the 65 history of Kansas basketball, beat them the worst in their home arena, and they're number 4 in the country, and Shaka is actually finally living up to the potential that we knew that we could have right there as well. So
Travis,
looking good.
Travis, I think it's time for the adult supervision to step in here and get back on task.
All right,
guys.
All right, well, bye, guys. Y'all have a good day.
Have a great week.
Doug and Kevin, can you hang on for just a second?
Sure.
Yes,
okay, bye, guys.
Bye, Nikki. Bye.
Take care.
Rudy.